Welcome to today's video, where we are going to explore the daily life of Roman soldiers. From the moment they woke up inside their camps to the endless drills, the meals they shared, the duties they performed, and even the rare moments of rest, we are going to take you through everything that made up the routine of one of the most disciplined armies in history. But before you get comfortable, make sure you have hit the subscribe button and drop your city name along with your local time in the comments so we can see where in the world you are watching us from. When you imagine a Roman soldier, it is easy to picture him standing tall in gleaming armor, holding a shield and spear ready for battle. Yet the truth is that fighting was only a fraction of his life. A Roman soldier spent most of his days following a very strict routine that combined discipline work and community life. His daily schedule was carefully shaped not just to prepare him for combat, but also to keep him busy and loyal to Rome. The day of a Roman soldier usually began at sunrise, and there was no gentle waking up with breakfast in bed. A loud trumpet call echoed through the camp, signaling that it was time to rise. Soldiers would get up quickly, roll up their sleeping gear, and prepare for inspection. The Roman army was obsessed with discipline, so even the way a soldier folded his blanket mattered. Laziness or sloppiness could earn punishment, because the commanders believed that if a man could not keep his bed neat, he could not keep his shield ready for battle. After rising, the soldiers would line up for inspection. The centurion, who commanded about 80 men, checked everything from weapons to uniforms. Shields had to be polished, swords sharp, and sandals in good condition. The Romans believed that constant readiness was the key to survival. So these inspections happened every single day. They were not just about appearances, but also about keeping every soldier accountable. A rusty helmet or a broken belt might look small, but on the battlefield it could mean death. Once inspection was finished, the soldiers usually trained. Training was the backbone of Roman military life. It was not enough to be strong. A Roman soldier had to be skilled and coordinated with his comrades. Drills were repeated endlessly. Soldiers practiced marching in formation with heavy shields and javelins. They rehearsed how to advance, how to retreat, how to switch positions, and how to throw their peeler at just the right moment. The repetition might have been exhausting, but it turned an army of men into a single, well-oiled machine. The Romans also trained harder than they actually fought. Wooden swords and shields used in drills were deliberately heavier than real ones, so that when battle came, the weapons felt lighter and easier to use. Running long distances with full gear was common because soldiers were expected to cover ground quickly. They even practiced building camps from scratch, since setting up a fortified camp every evening was standard procedure. Campaign life for a soldier was never meant to be comfortable, but to make him resilient and adaptable to any situation. By mid-morning, training usually ended and soldiers were given different duties. Not every task was glamorous, but every task was essential. Some soldiers guarded the camp gates, standing watch and scanning the horizon. Others were sent to patrol nearby roads or villages, ensuring safety and Roman order. A significant number of men were put to work building, because the Roman army was also an army of engineers. Soldiers dug trenches, built roads, raised walls, and even constructed bridges and aqueducts. Their skill in construction was so great that many Roman roads built by soldiers over 2,000 years ago still exist. Today, work did not end there, because cleanliness was another Roman obsession. Soldiers were ordered to keep the camp tidy. They had to dig latrines, remove trash, and maintain proper drainage. Romans understood that disease could kill more men than swords, so strict hygiene rules were enforced. A dirty camp was a dangerous camp. A Roman soldier might have spent as much time sweeping or shoveling as he did wielding a sword. Around midday, the soldiers had a meal which was simple but nourishing. Roman military food was designed to be filling and long-lasting. A common diet included bread, porridge, beans, lentils, and occasionally meat or cheese. Wine diluted with water was also common. Soldiers were expected to carry some of their food with them during campaigns, and cook in small groups called contubernia. These groups of 8 men shared a tent and became something like a family. They cooked together, ate together, and faced punishment together if one of them made mistakes. This bond of brotherhood was one of the strongest features of Roman military life. After eating, soldiers sometimes had short periods of rest, but this was not leisure in the modern sense. They could mend their clothing, repair weapons, or tend to their gear. If a soldier was skilled in crafts like leatherwork or carpentry, he might use his spare time to fix equipment for his comrades. Gambling with dice, singing songs, or telling stories were also popular ways to pass time, but commanders kept a close eye to prevent idleness. Too much free time was believed to breed disobedience, so even relaxation was balanced with responsibility. In the afternoon, soldiers often drilled again or were given heavier construction duties. Large projects like road, building, or fort construction required hours of hard labor and hundreds of hands working in unison. It might seem odd to imagine elite soldiers covered in dirt with pickaxes and shovels, but this was everyday reality. The Roman army was both a fighting force and a workforce capable of reshaping entire landscapes. Wherever the army marched, it left behind traces of stone roads, forts, and walls. Evenings in the camp were a mixture of order and routine. As the sun began to set, another inspection often took place. Commanders ensured that weapons were cleaned and stored properly, and that guard rotations were clear. Night watches were a serious matter. Soldiers knew that being caught asleep while on duty could mean death, because the safety of the entire camp depended on alert sentries. Once the camp was secure, soldiers could gather around fires, sharing food, laughter, and stories. These moments built the camaraderie that kept men loyal in battle. Religious rituals also played a role in daily life. Roman soldiers were deeply connected to religion and superstition. Before meals or after a successful day of work, offerings might be made to the gods. Small shrines often stood in camps, and soldiers prayed for protection, courage, and victory. Religion bound the soldiers together and gave meaning to their discipline. It reminded them that they were not just fighting men, but also representatives of Rome and its divine mission. As night fell, the camp grew quiet. Soldiers returned to their tents, each shared by 8 men in their contubernium. They lay on simple straw mats or wooden bunks with their shields and weapons within reach. A soldier never truly rested without his gear nearby, because surprise attacks were always possible. Life in the Roman military was defined by preparedness. Even in sleep, soldiers were ready to rise at the trumpet call to defend their comrades and their empire. This daily rhythm of rising at dawn, training, laboring, eating, marching, guarding, and finally, resting built men into professional warriors. The discipline shaped their bodies, but also their minds. They were constantly reminded that their lives belonged not just to themselves, but to the legion and to Rome. A soldier's identity was forged, not in moments of battle, but in the endless routine of drills, chores, and duties. For many soldiers, this strict life was both a burden and a source of pride. On the one hand, it meant endless work and very little comfort. On the other hand, it gave them purpose. They were part of something larger than themselves, a powerful machine that could conquer nations and build empires. Even the most ordinary day in camp was part of Rome's greatness. A soldier's sweat was as valuable as his sword, and his loyalty was tested every sunrise. So while the world often remembers Roman soldiers as warriors locked in combat, their true daily life was far more complex. They were builders, cleaners, guards, farmers, craftsmen, and brothers in arms. Their discipline created the strength of the Roman Empire, and their ordinary routines laid the foundation for extraordinary victories. The daily grind of a Roman soldier was not glamorous, but it was the heartbeat of Rome's military power. When people imagine Roman soldiers, they often picture the heat of battle shields locked together and swords flashing in the sun. Yet the truth is that a soldier's daily life was rarely about fighting. Actual combat might come only a few times. a year, and sometimes not at all during an entire campaign. What truly defined a soldier's life was the routine that filled the spaces between battles. The days were long filled with work responsibility, and surprisingly, even moments of relaxation. These parts of daily life shaped soldiers just as much as combat did. One of the most important aspects of a Roman soldier's existence was the camp. The camp was more than a place to sleep. It was a small city on the move. Every time the army stopped, even for one night, they built a fortified camp with ditches, palisades, and organized streets. Soldiers did this so often that they could set up an entire camp in a matter of hours. The layout was always the same, with the commander's tent in the center surrounded by streets running at right angles, like a miniature version of Rome itself. This order was not only for safety, but also for discipline. It reminded soldiers that even far from home they were living under the watchful eye of Roman authority. Inside the camp, life was communal. Soldiers did almost everything together, from eating to sleeping to working. Each group of 8 men, called a contubernium, shared a tent and cooked their meals together. This bond created a strong sense of brotherhood. A soldier might miss his family back in Italy, Gaul, or Spain, but the men who shared his tent became his new family. They laughed together, grumbled together, and endured the same hardships. The loyalty between tent mates was often stronger than blood ties, and many soldiers trusted their contubernium. Brothers with their lives. Daily chores were constant. Soldiers had to cook their own food, grind grain into flour, and bake bread. They also repaired their clothing and equipment. A soldier might spend an evening mending sandals or sharpening his sword. These chores were not optional, because neglecting them could mean hunger or danger in the field. The Roman army placed great value on self-sufficiency, which is why soldiers were trained, not only as fighters, but also as workers capable of surviving in any environment. Food was simple, but it was a crucial part of daily life. A Roman soldier's rations often included wheat, barley beans, lentils, dried fruit cheese, bacon, and sometimes fresh meat when it was available. Soldiers carried small hand mills to grind grain into flour, which they baked into flat bread over a fire. Meals were eaten quickly, but they were also moments of rest when soldiers could share stories or jokes around the campfire. While the diet might seem repetitive compared to modern tastes, it was enough to keep men strong and marching for miles day after day. Another important part of life was marching itself. Campaigns meant endless walking. Soldiers were expected to carry their own gear, which could weigh around 30 kilograms, including weapons armor, food, cooking supplies, and personal items. The Romans even had a nickname for their men, mule soldiers, because of the heavy loads they carried. Marches could cover 20 miles a day, and soldiers were expected to maintain formation and discipline, no matter how tired they felt. At the end of the march, they still had to set up the camp before resting. The march was not just a way to move from place. To place it was training in endurance and obedience. When not marching or working, soldiers could sometimes enjoy leisure activities. Dice games were especially popular, and archaeologists have found many sets of Roman dice at former military sites. Gambling was technically forbidden, but it was so common that commanders often ignored it unless it caused trouble. Soldiers also played board games carved into stone or wood. They sang songs, told stories, and sometimes practiced music instruments. Like horns and flutes were used in the army, not only for entertainment, but also for signaling commands during battle. Leisure might have been rare, but it was valuable for keeping morale. High religion was deeply woven into the daily life of a soldier. Romans believed the gods were always watching, so sacrifices and rituals were regular events. Each legion had its own standards, sacred emblems that were treated with deep respect. Soldiers swore oaths of loyalty to these standards and to the emperor. Small shrines were built inside camps where offerings of food or incense could be made before a march or after a victory. Superstitions were common too. A soldier might carry a lucky charm or follow certain rituals to ward off bad luck. The belief that the gods protected them gave soldiers courage in the face of danger. Health and hygiene also played a major role in soldier life. Unlike many societies of the ancient world, the Romans understood that clean water and proper sanitation were vital. For survival, military camps included latrines, drainage systems, and rules for waste disposal. Bathing was encouraged whenever possible because commanders knew that disease could wipe out an army faster than swords or arrows. Soldiers might not have enjoyed luxurious baths every day like Romans in the cities, but they were far cleaner and healthier than many of their enemies. This attention to hygiene was one of the hidden strengths of the Roman military. Relationships with local populations also shaped daily life. Soldiers stationed in provinces far from Rome often interacted with local villagers. Some bought goods from markets, while others formed friendships or even relationships with locals. Officially, Roman soldiers were not allowed to marry during their service, but many had partners or children anyway. These unofficial families often lived near military forts, creating communities of civilians around the camps. While the army tried to maintain strict discipline, it could not completely control human connections. Soldiers were not just warriors, they were also men longing for comfort and companionship. Discipline, however, remained at the core of everything. Soldiers lived under strict rules and punishments for disobedience, where severe falling asleep while on watch could mean death. Theft, desertion, or cowardice in battle were treated harshly. Discipline was not only about punishment, but also about creating unity. A Roman soldier was reminded constantly that he was part of something larger than himself. The strict order of the camp, the drills, the inspections, all reinforced the idea that his life belonged to the legion and to Rome. This discipline was what made the Roman army so formidable and so feared. Evenings were often the quietest moments of a soldier's day. After duties were complete and guard rotations were assigned, men gathered around fires. They shared meals, sang songs, played games, or simply talked about home. These small moments of humanity helped balance the harshness of military life. A soldier might dream of his family farm or recall memories of childhood while staring into the flames. Even in the midst of discipline and hardship, he could still find fragments of peace. When night fully settled over the camp, silence was enforced. Guards stood watch at the gates, while the rest of the soldiers slept in their tents. Weapons and shields were always kept close because an attack could come at any moment. The Roman army never allowed itself to be unprepared. Soldiers slept lightly, knowing the trumpet could sound at any time, calling them to arms. The rhythm of daily life was strict, but it was also comforting, because every man knew exactly what was expected of him. This balance between discipline and humanity, between work and rest, defined the life of a Roman soldier. They were not just warriors waiting for the next battle, but men who cooked, cleaned, marched, built, prayed, played, and dreamed. Their daily lives may have looked ordinary, yet it was in this ordinariness that the power of Rome was built. The routine gave them strength, the discipline gave them unity, and the bonds of brotherhood gave them courage to face the hardships ahead. The legacy of the Roman army was not written only in victories and conquests, but also in the countless days spent training, marching, building, and living together. Each camp, each meal, each moment of laughter or labor contributed to the strength of Rome. The true power of the Roman soldier was not just in the clash of swords, but in the steady heartbeat of his daily life. If there was one thing that set Roman soldiers apart from almost every other army of the ancient world, it was their relentless training. From the moment a man joined the legion, his life was reshaped by a schedule of constant drills and exercises. Training was not just about learning how to fight, it was about building discipline, endurance, and unity. It turned ordinary farmers or laborers into highly skilled warriors who could march in perfect formation or build a fortress in record time. The Roman army believed that battles were won not by strength alone, but by preparation and order. The first stage of a soldier's training was physical fitness. The Romans demanded that every man be strong enough to carry heavy loads march long distances and fight for hours without collapsing. Recruits ran long distances, carrying their full gear, practiced swimming across rivers, and lifted weights made from stones or logs. The goal was to push their bodies to the limit, so that in battle, the strain would feel lighter. A Roman soldier was sometimes called a moving fortress because of the weight he carried, and only intense training could prepare him for that kind of burden. Marching was the foundation of Roman military life, and so it became one of the most important parts of training. New recruits were drilled to march up to 20 miles a day in formation, while carrying packs that weighed over 30 kilograms. They had to keep perfect step with their comrades and never break rank, no matter how tired they felt. If one man fell out of line, it disrupted the whole formation, so discipline was enforced with strict punishments. A soldier who could not endure the march could not endure war, and the Romans knew it. Weapons. Training came next, and it was both brutal and clever. Recruits did not begin with real swords or spears. Instead, they used wooden versions that were deliberately heavier than the real thing. Swinging these wooden swords again and again built muscle and endurance, so that when the soldier finally wielded his real gladius, it felt almost effortless. They practiced thrusting at wooden posts, since the gladius was designed primarily for stabbing rather than slashing. The Romans believed that a thrust to the enemy's chest or stomach was far deadlier and required less effort than swinging wildly. With the blade shields were also part of daily drills. Soldiers learned how to hold their large rectangular scutum close to their bodies and how to use it both defensively and offensively. A Roman soldier was taught not only to block blows, but also to slam his shield into an enemy to knock him off balance. The coordination of shields in formation created an almost impenetrable wall. This was known as the testudo or tortoise formation, where soldiers locked shields above and in front, creating a shell that protected them from arrows and stones. Practicing these formations over and over made the army a moving machine of war. Throwing the pilum, or Roman javelin, was another essential skill. Soldiers practiced throwing it at targets from different distances. The pilum was designed to bend upon impact, making it difficult for enemies to throw it back. Training soldiers to throw in unison created a deadly rain of spears that could break enemy lines before swords were even drawn. Discipline in timing was crucial. Every soldier had to release his pilum at the same command to maximize the effect, and this could only be achieved through endless repetition. Beyond weapons, the Romans also trained in building skills. A Roman soldier was expected to know how to dig trenches, cut timber, construct walls, and raise siege engines. Training camps often doubled as construction sites where recruits practiced making roads or fortifications. The Romans understood that an army that could build as well as fight could survive anywhere. Soldiers built bridges to cross rivers or forts to protect supply lines. Their ability to construct quickly and efficiently was one of the hidden strengths that allowed Rome to control such a vast empire. Training was not limited to physical tasks. Mental discipline was equally important. Soldiers were drilled to obey orders instantly without hesitation. A centurion's command had to be carried out the moment it was given, even if it seemed pointless. This conditioned men to trust their leaders and their comrades in battle where hesitation could mean death. Roman soldiers were also trained to maintain formation under pressure, even when facing terrifying cavalry charges or volleys of arrows. Courage in the Roman army was less about reckless bravery and more about trusting the system and standing firm with your unit recruits. Also learned survival, skills that would help them in long campaigns. They were trained to forage for food, gather firewood, and find clean water. They learned how to set up tents, how to make fires, and how to cook meals for their contubernium. Being a soldier meant being self-sufficient. Every man had to contribute to the small group or risk being punished. Soldiers were not pampered or cared for by servants. They lived by their own labor and discipline, which gave them resilience in harsh conditions. Religious and ceremonial practices were part of training as well. Soldiers took oaths of loyalty to Rome and to their standards. These oaths were sacred, and breaking them was seen as both a crime and a sin. Before battles or during training ceremonies, sacrifices might be made to the gods. Soldiers were reminded constantly that their duty was not only to their commanders, but also to the divine order of Rome. Religion reinforced discipline and provided a sense of purpose to the long, grueling hours of drills, and labor training also helped build camaraderie. The endless hours of marching, drilling, and sweating side by side forged bonds that were hard to break. Soldiers learned to trust one another because they had suffered together in training. This brotherhood was vital on the battlefield, where survival often depended on the man next to you. The sense of belonging to a unit gave soldiers strength to endure hardship and courage to face enemies who might outnumber them. For many recruits, training was the hardest part of military life. The endless repetition, the strict discipline, and the heavy workload could feel unbearable. Yet it was this system that turned the Roman army into one of the most effective fighting forces in history. The victories of Rome were not just the result of brilliant generals, but of countless soldiers who had trained relentlessly for every possible situation. Their daily routines of drilling and building created an army that could adapt, survive, and win. Even when soldiers were no longer recruits, training never stopped. A veteran might have fought in many battles, but he was still expected to march, drill, and practice regularly. The Roman army believed that complacency was dangerous, so training was lifelong. A legion that stopped drilling would quickly lose its edge. The Roman way was simple. Constant preparation meant constant readiness. In the end, training was not just about building strong bodies and sharp skills. It was about shaping men into Roman soldiers who lived by discipline, loyalty, and unity. A Roman soldier's life was forged not in the heat of battle, but in the relentless grind of training. Every thrust of a wooden sword, every mile of a march, every order obeyed without hesitation, created the foundation of an empire. Training was the silent battlefield on which Rome won its greatest victories. While the daily life of a Roman soldier was filled with discipline work and training, it was also deeply connected to the larger Roman world. A soldier was not only a fighter, he was also a symbol of Rome's power and a representative of the empire. Wherever he went, his role went far beyond the battlefield, shaping politics, economy, culture, and even the identity of Rome itself. To understand the full life of a soldier, we must see how he fit into the grand machine of Roman society. First, we need to look at recruitment. Joining the Roman army was not a casual decision. For much of the Republic, only Roman citizens could serve as legionaries, and they were expected to commit to years of service. By the time of the empire, service terms could last up to 25 years. This meant that becoming a soldier was not just a job, it was a lifetime commitment. Many recruits were young men from farming families who saw the army as a chance for steady pay food and the possibility of land after retirement. For poorer citizens, it was often the only path to security. The rewards of service were significant. Soldiers received regular wages, which, while modest, gave them financial stability. Many also earned bonuses from victories or special campaigns. The promise of land at the end of service was especially attractive, since owning land was a mark of respect and independence in Roman society. In time, military service became a pathway for social mobility. A poor farmer's son could finish his service with land, wealth, and citizenship if he had not already possessed it. This made the army one of the most important engines of opportunity in the empire. But life as a soldier also demanded sacrifices. Soldiers spent years away from their families, often stationed at distant frontiers where Rome needed defense. Wives were not officially permitted during active service, though as we know, many soldiers did have unofficial families near the forts. The distance and separation created strain, and many soldiers returned to homes that had changed completely during their long absence. Some never saw their families again because 25 years of service was a lifetime for many men. The presence of soldiers also had a powerful effect on the local populations of the provinces. Rome-ruled camps were often established near towns or villages, and over time civilian settlements grew up around them. Merchants saw opportunity in selling goods to soldiers. Blacksmiths, bakers, and traders all made their living supplying the legions. Local women sometimes formed relationships with soldiers, creating mixed families. These communities became melting pots of Roman and provincial cultures, spreading Roman language, customs, and religion far beyond Italy. Soldiers were therefore not only warriors, but also agents of cultural exchange. The Roman state carefully maintained loyalty among its soldiers because the army was the backbone of the empire. Emperors understood that a content army meant stability, while a restless one could mean rebellion. To keep soldiers loyal, emperors often granted donatives, which were special payments or gifts distributed to the troops after major victories or during times of political transition. Some emperors even bought the loyalty of the army with generous rewards. This highlights how central soldiers were to Roman politics. They were not just protectors of the state, but also kingmakers who could decide the fate of emperors. Religion also tied soldiers to Roman society. Every legion carried its standards, which were not only military symbols, but also sacred emblems. Soldiers swore their loyalty not only to Rome and the emperor, but also to these standards. Losing a standard in battle was considered a terrible disgrace, and recovering one was treated as a national triumph. Religious ceremonies within the army reflected broader Roman religious practices. Soldiers made offerings to Jupiter, Mars, and other gods before battles and thanked them afterward. These rituals reinforced the sense that military service was connected to Rome's divine mission. One of the most striking aspects of the soldiers' place in society was the respect and fear they commanded. In Rome itself, soldiers were often seen as protectors of order. They paraded through the streets in triumphs after great victories, their armor shining and their standards raised high. Citizens cheered and showered them with flowers. In the provinces, however, soldiers could also inspire fear. Their presence was a reminder of Roman domination, and their discipline made them a force to be obeyed. For local populations, the sight of legionaries marching in formation was both awe-inspiring and intimidating. Economically, soldiers were vital to the empire. Their pay created demand for goods, their labor built roads, bridges, and fortresses, and their protection allowed trade to flourish. Roman merchants could travel safely across the empire because soldiers guarded roads and patrolled frontiers. Without the army, the vast Roman economy would have collapsed. Soldiers were as much builders of prosperity as they were defenders of territory. Education and skills learned in the army also carried into civilian life. Many veterans became farmers, craftsmen, or even local officials after their service ended. Their training in discipline, organization, and leadership made them valuable members of society. Some veterans were settled in colonies across the empire where they acted as both farmers and defenders. These colonies spread Roman culture, further creating strongholds of loyalty that helped Rome maintain control of distant lands. The army was therefore not only a military force, but also a tool for expanding Roman civilization. Despite the respect soldiers earned, their lives were not free from challenges. They were sometimes seen as rough or uncivilized by Rome's elite citizens who prided themselves on philosophy, literature, and politics. The life of a soldier was considered harsh compared to the cultured life of a senator or scholar. Yet when danger threatened Rome, it was the soldiers who stood at the front lines. Their sacrifices ensured the survival of the empire, and even if they were sometimes looked down upon, they were always needed. Another important part of the soldier's place in society was retirement. After years of service, a soldier who survived was often rewarded with land or a pension. This retirement was not just a personal reward, but also a political strategy. Settling veterans in conquered lands created loyal communities that secured Roman influence in the region. It also provided former soldiers with stability after decades of hardship. Some veterans thrived in this new life while others struggled to adapt after so many years under strict military discipline. The image of the Roman soldier became a cultural icon throughout history. Even during his lifetime, he represented bravery, discipline, and loyalty to Rome. Statues, carvings, and writings celebrated the legionary as the protector of the empire. Children grew up hearing stories of the army's triumphs, and soldiers returning home were often treated as heroes. The soldier embodied Roman values of strength, endurance, and devotion to the state. He was both a man of flesh and blood and a symbol of Rome's eternal power. When we look at the life of a Roman soldier within society, we see a figure of contrasts. He was both respected and feared, both celebrated and separated from ordinary family life. He was a builder of peace, but also a bringer of war. He spread Roman culture while also enforcing Roman rule. His 25 years of service demanded loyalty, sacrifice, and endurance, but in return, it gave him identity, security, and often honor. The place of the soldier in Roman society was not simple, but it was central. Without him, Rome could never have been the empire that history remembers in the end. The daily life of a soldier was not just about drills and marching, but also about his role as a citizen, a worker, a cultural ambassador, and a political force. He was the backbone of Rome, the shield of its people, and the symbol of its strength. To understand the Roman soldier is to understand Rome itself, because in his discipline, his struggles, and his triumphs, we see the heartbeat of the empire. When people look back at the glory of the Roman legions, it is easy to see only the victories, the shining armor, and the discipline that made them famous. But behind the glory were countless hardships that shaped the daily lives of soldiers. Life in the Roman army was never easy. It was a constant test of endurance, where discomfort, danger, and sacrifice were part of every day. A soldier's routine might have seemed organized and steady, but beneath the surface, it carried struggles that made survival itself an achievement. One of the greatest challenges was the relentless marching campaigns. Often required soldiers to walk for weeks across mountains, deserts, and forests, while carrying loads that could weigh up to 30 kilograms. The pack included weapons, armor, food, cooking gear, and tools. Soldiers sometimes joked that they were more like mules than men. Marches could cover 20 or more miles a day, and the men had to keep formation the entire way. Even after such exhausting travel, they still had to dig trenches, set up the camp, and stand guard. Fatigue was a constant companion, yet complaining too loudly could bring punishment from a centurion. Harsh weather was another enemy. Soldiers faced blistering heat in North Africa, icy winters along the Rhine, and endless rains in Britain. Unlike civilians, they could not simply stay home during bad weather. Their duty required them to march, fight, or build. No matter the conditions, armor became unbearably heavy under the sun. While freezing winds cut through thin cloaks during winter, exposure was a silent killer, and frostbite or heat stroke were real dangers. The ability to endure nature's extremes was as important as wielding a sword. Food was a daily concern, even though rations were carefully organized. Shortages were common, especially during long campaigns. Soldiers might go days with only bread, porridge, and water. If supplies failed, they had to forage, hunt, or even take from local populations, which often caused tension with villagers. Hunger weakened morale and could make an already harsh life even harder. Cooking was done in groups of 8, and the quality of the meal depended on the skills of whoever was assigned to prepare it. Some men became clever with spices or local ingredients, but for most soldiers, meals were repetitive, and plain disease was a far greater threat than enemy armies. Roman commanders knew this and pushed strict rules of hygiene. Soldiers had to dig latrines away from water sources, keep their camps clean, and wash whenever possible. But despite these efforts, illness often spread quickly. Fevers, infections, and stomach problems could wipe out more men than swords on a battlefield. Medical care existed, but it was limited. Doctors in the legions used herbs, simple surgeries, and bandages, but a serious wound or infection could easily be fatal. A soldier learned to live with the constant shadow of sickness. Discipline itself was another challenge. The Roman army demanded complete obedience to orders. Punishments were harsh and sometimes brutal. A soldier who fell asleep on watch could be executed. Cowardice, desertion, or theft brought severe consequences. The most feared punishment was decimation, where 1 in 10 men of a unit was chosen by lot and executed as a lesson to the rest. Though rare, the threat of such discipline kept soldiers in line. Even small mistakes like poor cleaning of armor or disobedience during drill could result in flogging or extra duties. The strictness that made the legions powerful also made daily life tense and unforgiving. Loneliness and separation weighed heavily on soldiers. Most served for decades far from their families and homelands. Though they formed brotherhoods with their fellow soldiers, many still longed for wives, children, and parents. Official rules banned marriage during service, though many soldiers ignored this by forming unofficial families near forts. Still, the distance created emotional hardship. A soldier might receive letters from home, but news traveled slowly, and many never saw their families again. Some returned after 25 years, only to find loved ones gone, or lands changed beyond recognition. Fear was a silent companion. Soldiers might be brave, but they were also human. Facing enemy warriors, arrows, and ambushes was terrifying. Training taught them to stand firm in formation, but fear was always present. Veterans often admitted that the hardest part was not the fighting itself, but the waiting before battle. The trumpet call that signaled an attack sent shivers through every man's body. Yet fear had to be controlled because panic could spread quickly through a unit. The Romans knew that courage was not the absence of fear, but the discipline to act. Despite it, another hardship came from the endless labor. Soldiers were not just fighters, they were workers. Building roads, forts, bridges, and walls consumed much of their time and required back-breaking effort. They dug ditches, carried timber, and hauled stones. Sometimes campaigns seemed less like wars and more like endless construction projects. A soldier could spend weeks working with tools instead of weapons. His hands were often blistered and his back sore, yet the work was vital to Rome's power. Without these labors, the army could not march safely or hold its territory. The danger of mutiny or unrest within the ranks was another reality. Pay delays or unfair treatment could push soldiers toward rebellion. Though rare, these moments showed the strain placed on men who felt overworked and under-rewarded. Emperors often worked hard to keep the army satisfied with donatives and privileges, because a discontent army was as dangerous to Rome as any foreign enemy. The loyalty of the legions was priceless, but it had to be carefully maintained. Soldiers also carried the emotional burden of war. Death was always close. Whether in battle, from disease, or through accidents, many comrades were lost along the way. Funerals were simple but deeply emotional. Soldiers often buried their brothers in arms just outside the camp, placing stones or markers to honor their memory. The shared grief bonded men together, but it also weighed on their hearts. The cost of service was measured not just in years, but also in friendships cut short. The mental strain of routine could also be a hardship. Life in the army was repetitive. Training drills, inspections, marching, and chores filled every day with little variation. Some soldiers found comfort in the routine, while others grew restless. Discipline left little room for individuality and creativity. A soldier might dream of freedom or adventure, but in reality, he lived by the same trumpet calls and commands every day. This monotony tested patience and spirit, almost as much as physical hardships tested the body. Even retirement was uncertain. After 25 years of service, a soldier might receive land or a pension. But survival to that point was far from guaranteed. Many died young from wounds, disease, or exhaustion. Those who did reach retirement often struggled to adjust to civilian life. Years of discipline and routine made it hard to return to farming or ordinary work. Some veterans thrived by using their skills as leaders, builders, or guards. Others felt lost without the structure of the Legion. The hardships of service often followed them long after their duty was done. Despite these struggles, soldiers endured because they believed in the rewards and the honor of service. They found strength in brotherhood, pride in their discipline, and comfort in the belief that they were part of something greater than themselves. The hardships shaped them into the unbreakable force that made Rome's empire possible. Without the endurance of its soldiers, Rome could never have conquered so much of the known world. The daily challenges tested their limits, but also forged their greatness. In the end, the life of a Roman soldier was as much about surviving hardship as it was about fighting battles. The marches, the hunger, the diseases, the punishments, and the losses were constant companions. Yet through it all, soldiers carried on with loyalty to their comrades and to Rome. Their endurance became the foundation of an empire, and their struggles remain a reminder that behind every victory stood countless days of hardship and sacrifice. Life as a Roman soldier was not only about discipline, training, and warfare, it was also about the relationships forged between men who lived side by side for years. These bonds were more than casual friendships. They became as strong as family ties. Soldiers depended on one another for survival in battles, but also for comfort and companionship during the long stretches of boredom and hardship that came with daily life in the army. A soldier often knew the man sleeping in the cot next to him better than his own brother back home. Shared hardship was the glue that bound them together. Marching in the blistering heat, carrying heavy loads, setting up camp in the pouring rain, or facing fear together before battle created connections that could not be broken. A man who shared your tent, ate from the same pot, and watched your back in a fight was someone you trusted with your life. Even the strict Roman discipline encouraged this bond. Soldiers knew that deserting their comrades or breaking ranks could mean disaster for the whole unit. The Legion functioned like one body, each soldier, a vital part of a greater whole. This sense of brotherhood extended into rituals and traditions. Roman soldiers were known to celebrate victories, together with feasts, music, and sometimes games. After long campaigns, men would gather around campfires telling stories of home or of battles past. They would drink watered-down wine, sing marching songs, and laugh to lift their spirits. These simple moments of camaraderie helped to ease the mental strain of their service. It reminded them that although they were far from their families, they had found a second family within the Legion. But life was not only laughter and companionship. The weight of service was heavy. Every soldier knew that their life could end on the battlefield, or that a commander's harsh punishment could fall upon them for even minor mistakes. A soldier lived constantly aware of the risks of his duty. A raid could come suddenly, or a campaign could stretch on for years, taking him far from everything he once knew. Many soldiers who enlisted for steady pay or the promise of land often found themselves wondering whether the rewards were worth the sacrifices. The psychological toll was real. Soldiers endured more than physical pain. They lived with the uncertainty of whether they would ever see home again. Letters from family were rare and slow to arrive if they came at all. A man might leave his village at 17 and return decades later, scarred and aged if he returned at all. Some soldiers even lost their sense of belonging outside the army. Their whole identity became tied to the Legion, making civilian life feel strange and unwelcoming once their service ended. Despite this heavy burden, there was pride too. A Roman soldier carried the honor of representing Rome itself. Wearing the armor and bearing the eagle standards of the Legion gave men a sense of purpose. They were defenders of an empire that stretched across the known world. Each man knew that his role, however small, contributed to the strength and glory of Rome. This pride often gave them the strength to endure the hardest trials. A man could take comfort in knowing he was part of something greater than himself, something that would be remembered for generations. The daily balance between brotherhood and burden shaped the Roman soldier's character. Soldiers learned to mask fear with discipline, to find joy in small moments and to rely deeply on their comrades. They were taught to put the needs of the legion above their own and to accept pain, hunger and exhaustion as part of their duty. This way of life hardened them, but it also gave them resilience. Few societies have ever created soldiers so prepared to endure the demands of both war and peace. The story of a Roman soldier's daily life is not only about weapons and battles, it is also about laughter shared over bread in the evening, about sweat dripping under the sun as they trained together, about quiet conversations whispered before sleep, about the comfort of knowing that even in the darkest moment, you were never truly alone. The legion was a machine, but it was powered by men, with human hearts, and those hearts beat strongest when they beat together. To be a Roman soldier was to carry both honor and hardship. The honor came from serving Rome and upholding its power across distant lands. The hardship came from endless marches, strict discipline, and the constant threat of death or punishment. Yet through it all, the soldier's daily life was marked by resilience, camaraderie, and an unwavering sense of duty. These men built more than roads and forts. They built the foundation of Rome's strength, one day at a time, one march at a time, one battle at a time. Their legacy remains not only in the stones of ancient ruins, but in the stories of brotherhood, courage, and endurance that continue to echo through history.